Hello, and welcome back to the Rock Code Academy. I am your host, David Flanagan, although you may know me from across the internet as Rock Code, and of course this channel. It's been a while since we've streamed, a bit of an update. My office burnt down in April, and I've had to rebuild from scratch. So apologies for the lack of amazing, hopefully amazing cloud native and development kind of content. And I'm really excited today because this is a tool that I've been using for a little while now, and I've started to go kind of all in within my mono repository and using this to build out development environments that are just a joy to work with. And today we're taking a look at Devenv, which is a Next-based build tool that provides a great development experience. It's reproducible, it's fast, and as I said, a pleasure to work with. And to guide us on our journey of understanding Nix and Devenv and all of the amazing things we can do for that, I am joined today by the Kashix founder and maintainer of the Devenv project, Domin Kozar. Hey man, how's it going?
Hey, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here and to share the journey of what we've learned with Nix.
No, I mean, thank you so much for joining me. I'm genuinely super pumped, excited, although this is my excited face in Scotland, but I'm super excited to be diving into this today and sharing it with the audience because I have found that my life from a development environment standpoint has just been a lot simpler since adopting this tool. And I want to share that with the audience as well as get history, context, flavor, everything else that you can share about your journey along the way. So
Nice.
that being said, I'm going to
Mhm.
throw you under the bus and say, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you, what you've been up to, and give us all the details.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, so let's see how long of an intro we can do. So I think I've been part of the Nix community for quite a while. It's been about 10 years now. And before I was doing just consulting and a lot of Python and stuff. And a lot of the frustration with packaging let me and I was a Gentoo user before. Like a lot of the frustration with all around has led me into Nix very early on, and I've kind of never looked back. And the early days were the early days, so there was a lot to do, but we've come really far in the last 10 years. And then about like I think 6 years ago, I was really happy and really delighted to work with Logori. That was my kind of first time consulting gig where we were like essentially using Hydra to create these like huge matrices of different like kernels, different versions of software, and like running benchmarks with Nix on like networking cards and drivers like specialized built for them, and then creating these like graphs of like if you change the kernel version, if you change the different software versions, like what how does that impact performance and stuff. And X is really nice because you can kind of map through all the kernels, map through all the different software versions, and kind of generate derivations, which are like the builds of executing that benchmark. So that was really nice first gig. And then after that I worked at IOHK as a DevOps lead, introducing Nix into the whole process there, of like building the blockchain, blah blah blah. And then after that I created Cashix, as I saw that like I wanted to do a lot of Nix as part of IHK, but of course that was not a priority there, although we did a lot of great work there on Nix. So then I started Cashix, and it's been about 5 years now, I think, building first binary cache, then deployments, and then like a year and a half ago we started Devenv. Um, that's yeah, and a bunch of other stuff like Nix.dev was also our effort, which we donated, and the community, um, to improve the documentation in the Nix land and things like that. Anyway, lots of things. I can dive into any of them if you want, but
Yeah,
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I think we'll start with the question that I hear most when I go to conferences and I mention Nix or anything like this, right? Is that there's a lot of intimidation. I think people are scared about learning a new language, even if the tool itself is powerful. And I think there's a common consensus that it's considered quite academic. But I think that tide is changing. And I'm curious on your perspective here. Like, do you see people Did it come and speak to you? They're struggling with Next. Do they still think it's academic? And do you see this trend where more people seem to be just embracing it now, especially in the last 12 months? I seem to think that people are a lot more open to using Next and Next tools.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that it has changed a lot, mostly because there is a lot of people from the industry who are using Nix and bringing that like mindset into it. So I don't see like the academic side. I don't see it mentioned almost at all anymore. I think a lot of that has is due to Rock Garbus, who led like the redesign of nixos.org about a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And like the original website was very academic. Like you could really see, it's like talks about purely functional and all these words that like nobody cares at the end of the day, right? What they want to do with Nix. So that has changed a lot into what the industry is used to, which is like showing off the features and the benefits of using a Nix and things like that. So I think the redesign of the website was a huge move, and then also like just people all around who are bringing that developer experience mindset to Nix and trying to make it better and more stable and things like that. So I think it's like no single thing, but it all kind of trickles up or trickles down to what we have right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the academic side for me is whenever I hear someone say hermetic or idempotent, I'm like, okay, here we are
Ye-
again. It's something hard, but these things they mean something different in each context. And I think the next context is something that is like containers now, right? We take these for granted, and I think next is maybe the next kind of adoption point that we're going to see in this space. But let's break down next, right? Because we've said a few things now. You've said Nexos, there's next. These are actually many projects, right? There's next the language, there's next the package manager, there's next OS, the operating system. I don't even know if I've missed anything there, to be honest. But you don't need to buy into all of this. You can pick and choose the parts you want, right?
Yeah, so I think the most confusing part is that like we don't really have a good name for the project. There was a times where we called it the NixOS. There was sometimes where we called it Nix. So it's been a lot of discussions. I've been big proponent even when I was still in the foundation to pick a name that like is for the project itself that is completely distinguished. Um, but yeah, Nix is like kind of like the language. Then it's like the package manager, and then kind of like the whole facade of tooling, right? And then like NixOS builds on top of that and provides its own interface, and for example, Devenv as well. So it's quite a few layers, and I think that's and what used to be really hard as well. That Nix was really hard to Google because it was like Unix and things like that were like popping up. Now that Nix is so popular, I think Google is doing a great job of prioritizing us, but that's luckily solved. But yeah, that all creates this confusion. But like the essence is you want to use Nix. That's kind of like the core. Nix is like the distribution, I would say, where you get like the actual command line, um, and then you can like slowly progress into like, do you want to have developer environments? Do you want to have deployments? So like there's a lot of different projects. There's like Nix Darwin, which manages like your macOS kind of configuration, home manager, and then there's a lot of projects, but like the essence is kind of like the command line tool and then the language itself.
Okay, so let's lean into the Devenv aspect of this then. Right? This is the project that we want to show people today. In order for someone to get started and recreate some of the things we're going to do today, which parts of Nix are they buying into? Right? Is it the Nix language? Is it Nix packages? Do they need Nixos? Like, how does Devenv and Nix correlate?
Yeah, so one of the I don't know, I this is a bit of a thing that I like to say, that Nix is kind of like the JavaScript of DevOps, right? Because the language is like uh, it's an old language by now, and it's there's a lot that could be fixed or changed initially. So we're kind of stuck with what it is, because we don't want to break backwards compatibility. So especially like conversions between different types and things like that are quite tricky for beginners, I would say. Um, So one of the insights that I had was like, okay, we don't want to like really use all the features of the language. What we want to expose to the users is like very simple API, which is essentially like the attributes that you kind of toggle to some values. Um, so like previously, I think if you use like Nick shell and things like that, it's great, but like you needed to know quite a bit of the language to kind of get things like wired up. So Devenv kind of like hides all that complexity away and kind of exposes this. Like I like to describe it as like a simple JSON language with like functions, right? Because if you don't really dive into the dark corners, that's what you know. We need a book like Nick's The Good Parts. I think it's exactly the same as the JavaScript. Um, so like that was the insight, right? We want to really dumb down the use of the language and things that people need to do in order to start with Nix.
Yeah.
Because one of the main like complaints that you hear from people about Nix is that, oh, it's, you know, like hard things are easy but easy things are hard. And I think that this part where easy things are hard is mostly the developer experience that is just been quite a hard thing. So that's what we've been like really focusing on with Devenv, and trying to like start from like pleasurable experience and then make it functional later. So it's very controversial take on software, but yeah, that's the approach we took.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive into this. I think we should probably share my screen and dive into Devenv, show people how to get started, and explore some of those, quirks of the language as we progress.
Let's try it
So,
out.
fingers crossed. So, for anyone watching that does want to get started here, you can just go to devenv.sh, where everything that you need is there, including some samples of the language, the documentation, and the getting started guide, which we're going to kick the tires on. So, normally I would do the install, but I actually already have. I mean, I'm running Nixos today just for this session, so that's kind of cheating, right? But most people would have to have Nix available on their system. As we've kind of covered, it's available on Linux, Mac OS, so quite easy-ish to get started, and we're not going to cover this. Now, this is where I got tripped up when I first explored Devenv, so I'm hoping you can kind of guide us on this part, right? Is that to use Devenv, we actually have multiple options once Nix is available on our system. We can install the package into our environment using Nix shell, NixEnv, something like this. There's profiles and flakes, which are a completely different approach to doing it, right? We can use the profile, but we could also use a flake.nix. I'm still not entirely sure. Like, my Nix knowledge is very beginner, right? I know enough to be dangerous and get a development environment up and running, but I don't really understand all of the rest of the ecosystem at this point in time. So what I'm curious about, and I'm going to try and give you a specific question now instead of fluffing and waving my hands in the air, right? But you know Nix, you know Devenv, you built this tool. When you're starting a new project, do you go straight for a flake.nix? Do you use the Devenv CLI tool? Do you do something else? Like, what do you do, and what would you encourage other people to do?
Yeah, I used to be, you know, a huge fan of, and I still am a huge fan of flakes, because I think that the flakes solve a lot of the issues with like um, handling dependencies and things like that. So that's where I would start, like before I did Devenv. And then as I started to work on Devenv, I started to use it more and more, because I kind of, you know, followed the Pareto rule of 80-20%. And I think 80% of the time, you want just the developer environment for your project. That's like most of what you need, I think, when you are developing things. And because we've put so much work into Devenv, I think that it's a much simpler option. So I now it's just I would always go for Devenv. The only time where I would use Steel Flakes is when you really need to like distribute software. Like that's the part that Devenv doesn't do, at least at the moment. And but yeah, that's a different than topic. Like, what are the differences between Flakes and Devenv? Um, but I would use Devenv now for. I mean, I'm obviously biased toward Devenv because I created it. Like, so if I say that, it doesn't mean that much. But it is like I still, when I open a project, I decide if I want to use Flakes or not. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just curious, what you would reach for. And I think for the audience as well that aren't going to have as much experience with you and Nix, it's definitely the easiest way for them to get started as well. So let's go ahead and just make sure I have in my environment. Don't know why that didn't work.
Yeah, it needs this. Yeah. Now, if you have Flakes, this might complain, but let's see. This is like gonna show the experience. Oh, you're using the Zelly or whatever it's
Zelly.
pronounced.
Yeah, it's such a good multiplexer. It's fantastic.
Nice, I should try. So let's see if that will work.
Ta-da! Awesome. So install Devenv CLI, and then in order to create a new repository or add a Devenv to an existing project, I would guess, we could run devenv init. So I was going to do this, like right now we're in an empty directory that has nothing in it. I mean, we could certainly do that and add some components and stuff, but maybe it would make more sense to add this to an existing project. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think usually you kind of have an idea of what developer environment you want to build for. What source you have, and what you want to like. I don't know. Let's say you have a
Okay.
Rust project, right? So
Yeah,
it's
let's do it this way. I mean, I'm not going to put words in my audience's mouth, right? But they're typically cloud native senior developers who are programming in Rust or Go. So I think if we can try and run through two examples, the very simple Go program and a Rust program, I think that's going to be of most value to the people that watch this video. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that is our best bet for today. So let's start with Rust first, because it's my go-to language these days. And I'm going to run devenv init, and then we'll take it from there. Now, here's a question. What language is Devenv written in?
yeah, it's a good. So first, when I created Devenv, it was just like a glorified Bash script, um, because we were just trying to just like get the interface right and all that. Then I rewrote it to Python because I thought, okay, that would kind of like attract more people to contribute. It's a much better language to kind of uh, like write command line interfaces. But then I rewrote it to Rust actually. So some people were a bit like, "Whoa, what the hell's going on?" But what happened was I went to like something called um, what was it called? Tiger Sprint, which was like a Nix hackathon of about 20 people, and I was really happy. There was a friend who said, "Okay, I can teach you Rust pair programming," and I said, "Yeah, I wanted to learn Rust." So in a week, we rewrote Devenv in Rust from Python, and I was like, "Okay, if that's done in a week, then I'm happy." Um, and and so now it's in Rust, which is actually not like completely arbitrary or just because Rust is cool, but it's also because there is a lot of tooling being written in Rust. So I think it's nice that the community is approaching to Rust or any language really, but it is Rust, and I think Rust is a great language. Um, so that's one thing. The other one, there is Twigs, which is like a rewrite of Nix in Rust, twigs.dev, and I'm kind of really excited about that. I don't know how well it will go, but I think that it's super cool that, well, first of all, we have an alternative implementation of Nix, and second of all, I think it's done with the right foundations and things like that. So potentially we could integrate Wix at some point into Devenv, but that's like up in the air. So
Nice.
yeah.
Well, we have our first question, which is more related to the pronunciation of what I said, Zellage, but Hein is saying that it rhymes with prestige. So I guess that's Zellage?
Zalish.
Zellage.
Zalish, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah.
All
Zalish.
right. Yeah, feel free to use the comment box, people. If you have any questions or you want Domin to answer anything, feel free just to drop it in and we'll get to it as soon as possible. But for the moment, we have ran devenv init and we have a lock file, a next file, and a YAML file. I'm going to pop this open in VS Code. Close all the random pop-ups that I get. Oh no, okay, these are just hidden stuff, right? So what do you want to look at first? YAML, next.
I usually always open Nix first. And yeah,
All right.
so
So what we have is some next code that defines environment variables, packages, scripts, and some enter stuff. Do you want to just kind of give us the quick walkthrough of this init scaffolding?
yeah, so like essentially we have a bunch of called attribute sets, what we call in Nix, but they're kind of nested. So for example, the first example is env, which is where you can define environment variables. So that's like very commonly used in the environments, like either by there's also .env integration, so that's the most commonly used thing that you want to store secrets and things like that, which will then populate the env attribute for you from that .env file. So that's like kind of the one of the basic things, and the other one is the packages, so where you can define whatever packages you want to have available in your developer environment. And this all piggybacks on Nix packages, so whatever is available there is available also here. There's like Devenv search command, which kind of helps you to search through the options and through the packages at the same time. So like if you wanna, I don't know, if you type in like Postgres, you will see options from Devenv that you can set for Postgres quell, and also the packages and extensions and things like that that you can set. Um, and then there's like a bunch of other things like scripts, which essentially allows you to define different kind of scripts. This is like by default Bash, but now we've just recently added support that you can like write Python scripts or Rust scripts or whatever, and just kind of inline them or even import them from another file or whatever. So I think that's kind of nice. So those are then available inside the environment. Then enter shell and enter test are kind of like two like kind of usually Nix, they would be typically called hooks. So enter shell executes this bash code when you enter the environment, and enter test executes when you write devenv test, which is like this glorified way of okay, set me up the environment, set up the processes, which I'm going to mention a bit later, and everything, and then run this test, right? So it's kind of like a functional testing or whatever you want to call it, which is I think pretty cool feature that we added also quite recently. So maybe this needs a bit of a different order now that I'm talking about it. But at the bottom you can see there's like languages that you can set, which is Nix as a default as an example. But that we have about I think 51 or 52 languages right now, and it's super easy to add new ones. Um, and then the most exciting part, at least for me, is like processes and services. So processes is just a way to it's like a foreman proc file kind of format where you just define whatever command you want to run inside your environment that is like a long running process. And then the services are like a basically abstraction of top of that. So like Postgres, it will run a Postgres process for you, but expose a bunch of settings for you. So you can set like the initial database or where do you want Postgres to listen on the auth and things like that.
Yep.
And I think there's also like about 30 of them, like Redis, different like mail like testing services, and a lot of really commonly used developer processes that you want to have available that are common, like besides your application server, for example. So you would define like application server stuff as a process because it's like your thing, and then services are the things that you usually kind of like piggyback on. And then I think there's also pre-commit hooks. I'm a huge fan of pre-commit hooks. I think that they're like hated mostly because actually it's super hard to set them up. So like makes that part super easy. Another one is that I think that people don't use them correctly. Like you want to have pre-commit hooks locally that just run on the files that you modified, and that should be like super quick. So when you commit something, it shouldn't take more than a second for them to run. Um, so they kind of enforce like formatting and linting and things like that. But then the CI, which here by default, if you enable any pre-commit hook, will already automatically run as part of the Devenv test. So that is like kind of like the CI level where you want to enforce that everything is really like across the whole code base, like formatted. And if it's not, then that should kind of fail on your CI. Um, so I think that's, I don't know, I really like them, and there's a lot of people using those. So I'm really happy that to see that kind of adoption.
Nice. All right, there's a few things there I want to touch on. The first
Mhm.
one, I'll do pre-commit hooks first, just because that was the last thing you mentioned. I love the idea of Devenv automating that for me. The challenge I've always had is that every project that I do is in a mono repository, and the commit hooks are kind of globally scoped at that point. So I've never actually been able to get them work in a way that as I jump around services, it only loads the hooks that I need for that service. So yeah,
Mhm.
I like the idea. I just haven't seen an execution that works for me personally yet. But then a lot of people aren't building in mono repositories at the moment. So maybe it's an easy win for people that are watching. The other thing, sorry, do you have something to say there before I just waffle on for a bit longer?
No, I'm just curious about the use case. So like it's you you would like, so monorepo. Okay, that means you have like kind of sub projects, and you would want like pre-commit hooks defined per that sort of project, right? Kind of like.
Yeah, I would need like an envrc that unloaded the hooks as I jumped around and then only ran them
Mhm.
against that directory, which is probably quite tedious and cumbersome. But yeah, that's just the way that
Yeah.
everything I have is in one repository. My Rockwood Academy repository, it's all in there. Dozens of
Mhm.
services.
That's interesting. Yeah, we need to think about it, but
Well, I'll open an issue and we could have a chat.
yeah, that's great. That's perfect.
Uh, the thing that drove me to Devon was something that you also kind of, I think you focused on and you're kind of run through this file, which is processes and services. Now, the reason that that is what brought me over is that this is something I've done with containers since 2015, right? So nearly 10 years now. And I've written thousands, if not tens of thousands of Docker Compose files in my life. And they work, right? But there's no composition. I can't really
Hmm.
define what Kafka, what Redis, what MongoDB are, and then reuse them and consume them. And there are tools out there that try to solve this, but nothing's ever really worked. And I always found that I was rebuilding and re-implementing the same health checks over and over again, and copying and pasting it from project to project. And when I seen Devenv does this through, services dot, Kafka enable, etc., I was like, whoa, that that is really cool. This is what we need. But more importantly than that is that container-based workflows are really difficult for people that aren't running on Linux because containers aren't native. On Windows and on Mac, there's virtual machines, and they've never really solved that file syncing thing for hot reload to actually work effectively. And I think that this is why Nix is probably gaining a lot more momentum, at least in the circles and the people that I speak to over the last year, is that they need something that truly is cross-platform, that runs on Windows or Mac and Linux. And I don't know if Nix does run on Windows, but outside of WSL, right? But it certainly runs on Mac and it certainly runs on Linux. And
Mm.
giving people a development environment that is actually native to the host, I think is really important. And the fact that Devenv brings these services and processes across does make a lot of things just easier. That is the sole thing that won me over, and I think we definitely need to show off some of the amazing things you can do with services and processes as part of our demo.
Hmm.
Now, I know I just kind of waffled there, but I think it's so important. I think it just makes life so much easier for so many people, or can make life so much easier for so many people.
Oh yeah, for sure. So like, what's really interesting is that like one of the major users of Devenv right now, from like my like how to say non-statistical assessment, is that there's a lot of PHP users actually, and that is because they they have a lot of knobs to turn. For example, debug, like
Yeah.
they turn some PHP stuff with debug on and sometimes not. And a lot of these container-based Docker style builds, they just don't compose, right? So as soon as they saw the Devenv can allow them to like quickly switch versions, enable debug for different processes and things like that, they were like, okay, that was immediate sell. And then on top of the fact that Docker is super slow on macOS, so a lot of developers like need like it's a huge penalty for them. That fact that it runs natively,
Yep.
those two things just was an instant sell. And there's like really a lot of PHP developers.
Yeah, and it's not just
Use Docker.
it's not just PHP. It's any interpreted language. We're talking about Python, Ruby, PHP. These large projects have tens of thousands of files, and syncing them to a VM is never going to really ever be fast. I know they're trying, but it's been 10 years and it's not been a solved problem yet. So, yeah,
Yeah.
all these people have a lot of benefits from just running that Devenv init and getting started with a local environment. Now, let's get back to actually making this do something.
Let's try.
Yeah, so we said this is going to be a Rust project. I'm assuming, I do have cargo. I can't remove cargo, right? That's just something I've got. Not without rebuilding my system. And let's just get a local cargo. I don't even know how I'm going to be able to kind of show that, right? Because this is my next profile cargo. So let's just change. In fact, let's leave next because I'm curious about what we'll show people. Let's just do Rust enable. And if I just hit return, this is automatically going to reload and augment my environment because we have the envrc here, which tells it to use devenv as part of our process, right? So just by me hitting return, running any command, cding out and into this directory, we can now see that it is fetching Nix stuff and eventually Rust stuff to give us the tools that we need to successfully run and instantiate this project. Now, while that runs, maybe you could give us a little bit of information on, when I enable Nix and enable Rust, what is Devenv? What is it establishing? What is it doing for me?
Yeah, so like a lot of times when you develop for a specific language, you kind of need to look up, what compiler do I need, what like debugger do I need, maybe some profiling tools, language server support, things like that. So Devenv has this philosophy of kind of enabling all of that by default. So it's like not full batteries in terms of like everything, but it tries to kind of balance that out and says that like anything that you would potentially 80% of the time use, we kind of enable it. And then you have knobs to potentially disable that if you need to. But like, I think, yeah, this is like a design choice, right? Either you go super minimal and then you have to enable each thing. But I think like downloading those few megabytes of each tool is like quite not a big price to pay. I mean, at least us who are privileged to live in fiber optics or good internet, but hopefully everyone will be at that, is going towards that in the world. So I think that that's kind of like the design philosophy. And we are like trying to, for example, right now, Krish is working on adding language support. So like you will be able to get language server support. So you will get for each language already that pre-configured, and your editor just picks it up and things like that. So yeah, that's like the simple. Then, for example, in Rust case, you have a bunch of options. You can pick, you can set the targets. You like, I don't know, you want to target WASM. We do that. You wanna like pick a different channel. Let's say you want nightly Rust, right? We have support for that. So you can kind of like tweak your way into how you want that to be from our defaults that we provide.
Yeah, so let's dive into that a little bit. Now, I don't have fiber in my new office yet. I am waiting very patiently. I'm
Oh,
currently at 50 megabytes.
it's one
Hopefully,
gigabyte of it's quite a lot.
but if we go to this languages page, for a start, it just lists everything. But if we want to find the options for languages, this is going to take us to here. So if people do want to tweak and configure what they get, we can scroll down. Let's find the Rust example. Quite a lot of PHP stuff there, actually. Maybe we should have done that. But let's find Rust. So we can have enable. We can change the channel, as you said. We can add components. So by default, we're actually getting the compiler. We're getting cargo, Clippy, Rust format, and Rust analyzer, which is fantastic. And then there's Rust flags, molds, targets, etc. So yeah, everything that people need to be able to tweak and configure the way this language support works, you can just come to this page and even just go through to the source if you want to take a look at the Nix that makes this happen. This is one of the things that I thought was amazing when I stumbled across Devenv and started using it, is that like 90% of it is just Nix code too, right? Like if we go to the homepage, it's like, yeah, you got your 20% Rust, but most of this is just Nix code that facilitates that. I don't know if it's templating or spec or whatever, but yeah, this is a good way for people to get familiar with Nix by taking a look at the components, languages, processes, and services that you provide by support.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Nix. It really does. So like Devenv, the way I see it is like we took our expertise of how you should set up things and we kind of like abstracted that away, right? Which is the main pain point of many people who came to Nix was like, oh my god, it's difficult to pull everything together and you need to be a Nix expert. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way, right? It's just about um, a pattern called convention over configuration, which is like, by default, you get a really good set of things, and then you kind of configure your way into your desired path, right? Rather than you get a blank slate and then, you need to build everything yourself. So like in the past, the way I see it, there was a lot of early adopters of Nix, like me, who were super enthusiastic to hack their way through. But now people just they don't want to learn Nix, right? What they want is like a developer environment and do their work. So this is kind of like the gap that I see we're trying to fill in here.
Nice. All right. Well, my internet caught up, and if I run which cargo again, we now have a next store path for the Devenv version of this. And I just want to kind of highlight this. If I jump out and run which cargo, we go back to the original, and if I jump back in, we go back to the store. So I love this loading, unloading as I move around, and I'm only getting the tools for this project that I need. Sweet. So let's get some Rust code. Cargo init. And let's see. We have hello world. Now, we could just use cargo, right? We could do our build, we could run the project, but we want to lean into more Devenv features. So again, in your experience and what you do, what's your next steps? How are we looping in and bringing in more of Devenv's convenience to people as they adopt it in their project?
Yeah, so I think it would be two parts. One is like you would configure Rust. Let's say you want to use nightly channel because you're using some features from there. So you would first like explore what options we support for Rust, or even add like it's quite easy to add like new configurations options. Well, that's a bit advanced, so that's maybe later on. But the second part would be to define the processes. Like usually like a simple way to is just a simple watch. Watch this directory for changes. Like you can add like there's like a ton of watcher programs, and then when something changes, execute something. Right. That's like a very simple process that
Yeah.
I don't know. For example, you have Tailwind and you want to compile CSS, right? So every time that Tailwind file changes, you compile the CSS. Or like you would run a cargo watch, for example, right? As a process, as a development process. Those would be the first two steps, I think. And then the third one would be the pre-commit hooks, in my opinion, is to like enable Clippy, enable format Rust formatter and things like that.
Okay, let's try and go through each of those one at a time. So right now, let's try and set up the cargo watch. So every time I change my main.rs, it's going to recompile our project for us. I think that would be a good step. So is this something we're going to add to enter shell? Do we do it a different way? How would you set that up?
The cargo watch, I would just add it at the top when you have processes. So maybe, sorry, at the bottom,
Oh, yeah.
left, right. Um, yeah, so I don't know. Here you just pick a name you want, like cargo watch, and here.
And I don't think cargo ships with watch by default, does it?
Oh, it doesn't.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, Yeah, so we have to add that as a package, don't we?
Uh-huh.
So
Okay. Um, that's I have no idea how that's done. I guess packages.cargo minus watch would be my.
yeah, let's see.
I think you just. Yeah, there is legacy packages. Yeah, I think you
But
just
is it going to be like cargo
cargo minus watch.
packages? It's just
No,
I'm
I
just
think just cargo minus watch should be.
okay.
I don't know if that works well together, but probably does. Let's try. I have
Let's
to
see what
admit
happens.
that I don't use because I have language server support in my editor, so I usually don't use it.
All right. So what we've done here, added the package that we need, created a process. Now processes are only executed when we spin up the development environment. Is that correct?
Yeah,
So
this is like the run processes command, kind of like, which is heavily inspired by the proc file.
all right.
So what you see here is some a project called Process Compose, which I found is one of the best tools for this like kind of development environments processes preview. So at the top, you just see a list of processes that you can click. I mean, now we have only one, so there's not much to go. But then as you kind of switch up and down or whatever, or with the mouse, then you at the bottom the locks kind of change, so you can kind of see locks for each process, and you can like control R to restart it and things like that. So it's really convenient. Takes a bit of learning as any tool, but I found
Yeah.
it's the best one. You can also turn on different ones like Overmind, which I think is like a Tmax based, or Honcho, which is like a implementation of Foreman, and potentially any can be implemented as a way to run this. Um,
Nice.
but yeah,
So
this is the
let's
default one.
make a change. Let's say hello world with 2 exclamation marks. And there we go. We get our thing running in the background. So that's pretty neat. Nice, easy way to get started adding a custom process. But it's not just custom processes, right? If we come back to our dev.next, we have these kind of not managed, but provided services.
Exactly, yeah.
So
So here you see the full list of what's currently supported. Um,
yeah, I mean, the fact that temporal is here, I have struggled many times to set up temporal development environments. And for Devenv, it's a one line flag, which is great. So
yeah, so it's each of these is a lot of time spared for, yeah. And even like I like that, like if you use Docker, you always have this paradox of choice, right? You want to run Postgres or whatever, and then you go to Docker Hub, and now you need to pick which
yeah,
one you want to run. I mean, this is getting better by creating more official ones, but I find that it's nice here. You just have one, and that's it.
yeah, but even with the official ones, you still have to learn what environment variables you need. You have to work out the liveness probes and all of that. And
Yeah.
there's none of that that is specifically needed here. So let's just enable this one. Trying not to pull down too much with my 50 meg connection at the moment, but let's try and enable Postgres and temporal. And for
Uh-huh.
this, I'm just going to do quit, and it's already reevaluating my environment.
And here we go. Ah, it's not too bad.
Yeah, it shouldn't take too long. Well, that does that. I guess we could add we've got shells and we've got tests, right? So, and we've got this custom script here. So this would be another cool thing to show people, I think. Let's add a script to build our project. So build exec, and this could just be cargo build. And then in the shell, we can just do something like this. And we
Here
can,
into test, you could run cargo test, for example, right? That would be.
yeah. I mean, it should tell us we have 0 tests, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And let's just add an emoji because everything is better with an emoji, right? So I actually don't know how to type emojis on my Linux machine. On Mac, I use Raycast, but I don't think I have anything configured for that here. So we're going old school. Okay,
That's
so
perfect.
let's just reload this one more time with an enter key. This will set up our new script, our enter shell, and our enter test. Plus, we can take a look at the new services we now have available. So let's start with the scripts. We added one called build. This is just a convenience layer, right? To the point where people could just execute any of those script names and it runs the command for them. As far as, again, I want to dive into like your experience, right? You've been doing this for a long time now. It's very easy for people to reach for like a just file or a make file. Do you see these scripts as like an alternative to that? And I mean that through composition. Like if I run build, can it do multiple steps? Or should people still reach for a just file or a make file? Like how do you see that working now and in the future?
I think that the scripts are quite powerful. So because in Snakes, you can substitute a lot of things inside, right? So you have a programming language, so you can kind of reuse snippets and things like that. So like even even if you would like have things that depend on each other, you could kind of abuse them to like just like inline the scripts if you have like one thing and then the other should run. So you could have like build and then tests, and then
Ah,
inside test it runs the build. So you can do quite a lot. But I think once you really once it really gets complex, then probably you should reach out for a more frameworky approach. I don't know, just file, make file, whatever is your favorite one. But I think that you can get quite far with this one. Um,
I
so
don't
yeah,
know.
here you need to do config.scripts. So this is like config is a special thing. It's like essentially you're referencing the environment you're configuring. So like this Devenv definition is essentially a function where at the top, if you go to the very top, it's like a function of a few arguments. And what it's returning is config, but you also get this config as an input. So you can reference things um, as you define them. So the
Yeah.
tricky bit, of course, is you can create infinite recursion. If you would reference the config now in the build part of the script, that would get into some horrible error messages. So that's probably the hardest bit of Nix.
Yeah.
If you kind of get those recursion errors, but yeah, if you have to just get intuition about this, that you are like referencing what you're returning. But it's really neat, right, that you can do this. Um,
Yeah. I mean, would you welcome a pull request that looked like dependencies? Like, I know this is not doesn't really make sense, but I mean, something like that could probably be quite a good approach as well.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like that because this is exactly the mindset behind Devenv is not to use these advanced Nix features, but like dumb them down exactly and what you're saying. So that's a good one.
Yeah, I
Um,
think. I mean, I could write a just file and I can just execute them within. That's a perfectly good way to do it, and I think a lot of people would probably do that. But as I lean more into Devenv, I want to do more stuff that way. So yeah, there's something for me to think about in the future. Anyway, let's pop back over here. So we added our scripts. I'm going to run that publish one just because I didn't know you could do that interpolation within the script itself. That's pretty neat. So if I do publish, yeah, we get a build in the publishing. Awesome. We also did shell, test, and services. So we've already seen devenv up, so let's run it again. And we should see that we now have a process composed with multiple processes running. And we can show people that switching between the processes to see the logs and see what's happening. So there's our cargo check. Our Postgres is currently spinning up. It's not quite ready yet. Our temporal is already on the way and quite happy. I love that. It's so powerful. And now Postgres is ready as well. So
it's pretty crazy how simple it is, right? I don't know. It makes me smile each time. um,
yeah, 3 lines of code, like unbelievable. I mean, think of how much that would take in a Docker compose, just because YAML
yeah.
doesn't have that level of composition and remote packages and all this other. Wonderful feature. Absolutely love that. Cool. If that doesn't win people over, nothing will. So
Exactly.
people dropping off now, my fault. All right, let's quit this. So there we go. And the last thing that we've shown so far is the Devenv shell. Am I already in a shell?
Yeah, so because you're using the Devenv, which is like this tool that you're using when you just enter it, kind of behind the scenes enables the shell.
Yeah,
Um,
so if we just pop out and then pop back into Rust, and what we're looking for is that we should see this run entering shell and get version, which we have here. It's a neat feature. And the last one was our devenv test.
yeah, so I think this is another thing that is not well known and kind of new, but I find this really like really nice feature. I don't know what's happened now. Maybe, but yeah, the fact that you can run things with the whole environment enabled locally, I think that's quite unique.
Yeah, so our tests ran and they're successful. It's just all the process noise in the background.
Oh
So
yeah, this is like shutting down like errors.
yeah,
So yeah,
I wonder if you
maybe
can hide
we
those.
maybe we need to improve the output there a bit, because it's a
Yeah,
bit because like what we're doing is like we're running the processes, piping that to a standard output, and then also whatever the test is running. So that can be a bit confusing.
yeah.
There's
I
definitely
think a
room for
flag just
improvement.
to hide the service logs would be pretty.
Yeah.
But regardless, that is some serious amount of power, I guess, right? And convenience. But convenience more than power. I think that's the word I'm looking for. And again,
Mm.
we're at 54 lines. Most of that was provided as scaffolding for us. And we've had to change so very little, but in return, right? We've put so little in and we're getting a whole bang for our buck back. And I think that is just the true, now it's the right word, power of Devenv. So I think that's amazing. Such a great product. Wow. Now, I'll encourage the audience. Anything you want to see or ask, now would be a great time to throw that into the comments. And Domin, I'll ask you, is there anything of Devenv that we haven't covered that you think would be really cool to show the audience? I know we said we were going to do a Go example. We could do that too, but I think probably showing off this Rust one demonstrates everything that we need people to know about Devenv, right?
Yeah, I think the last missing bit is like people often ask how do I then deploy, right? Because I want to have the same environment potentially also in production. So Devon like ships with kind of a way to generate a container out of the development environment. So there is like Devenv container build, Devenv container copy, so you can like copy it to a registry, or even run, which kind of just runs Docker in the background at the moment, but that could be improved much further, I think. Um, so like you can take this environment and then like ship a container, and there's also a flag like container like config.container.isBuilding, so you can kind of conditionalize things based on if you're building a container or are you just entering a developer environment. So for example, let's say you have like a managed Postgres, right? Then you, instead of enable like services Postgres enable, you would say instead of true, you would say then config.container.isBuilding, exclamation mark, right? So you want to negate that, and then I think that's pretty neat, right? So
Yeah.
you're then like conditionalizing how what goes into container and what goes into your developer environment. Um,
Nice.
and there's like a few different so I think there's two containers that are provided by default, but you can create your own. One is just a simple shell. So if you say container, dev container uh, build shell, that will build only the shell. So let's say that's something that you would ship. Um, uh,
Oh, I don't have Docker.
oh, you don't? Yeah, but I think if you just do builds, you shouldn't need Docker. Or do you? No, you do need Docker.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, I think, yeah, here it's asking you at the bottom to like, it needs a few dependencies, so you need to like,
Ah, right. Okay.
yeah, like enable. So Nix to container is a really nice project. Um, oh, oh, Nix
Oh, I
packages.
didn't copy in this. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, we should probably have
No,
a
that was
better
me.
edit
I
for
think
this.
that was my terrible copy and pasting. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So now you right. So now it wants you to set a name. So like, unfortunately, yeah, that's not the best UX. But you can either set a name for the whole project, or for the container. But
Yeah.
yeah, for example, and I think it's gonna ask you for one more. Yeah, so one more thing. Now you need to enable this one. Yeah, that's something that we need to improve the UX. Like, you, if you need like two dependencies, we should be able to tell you that in one go. But
Yeah, but
I
even
don't.
at that, the fact that I am now building a container from this is pretty sweet. I actually had no idea that was something I could do. So
Yeah, so
that
like,
really leads me into getting. No, it's all great to have a development environment. Being able to get something into production is a different story, and I just completely missed this. So that's very, very cool. Awesome.
yeah, we have an example for fly.io, where you just like configure their registry, and like you can then push these things to fly.io, for example. So it's very easy to go from developer environment um, into production then.
Oh, so is that
Uh,
where does that live now?
um, test container. So yeah, that's now part of the Podman. No, wait. If you just do build, that doesn't like copy it anywhere. I think that's just built it. That's it. There's
Ah,
no.
right. Okay, okay.
It's more like if you want to have it as part of the CI or something. But then if you want to do something with it, you need to either copy it or run it. Those are the two things we support right now. Um, so like,
Okay. Copy. Let's see what the help says. It just wants a name. I'm going to call it test.
yeah. So by default, it's gonna copy to your local Docker, if you have one.
Cool. All right. Let's let that finish. So I've got a question from my point of view, but there's a couple of things in the chat, or at least one thing in the chat we'll cover as well. So
Mhm.
firstly, Ovend just says heart. So I'm assuming you're enjoying what you see, which is amazing. And then Hein is back with, it would be, I'm just going to put words in your mouth. It would be good if an S-bomb could be created with the container and bundled together. Is that something that
Mhm.
you have thought about or considered?
Yeah. So actually, there's quite a few projects that do create S-bombs, and we have the whole like Nix store closure, as it's called. So that should be possible to do. I haven't, I didn't dive into this that much, to be honest, because just it hasn't been like the forefront of what our customers are using, asking for. But yeah, it would be pretty neat. I agree. Like for me, the S bombs, it's always like, then what do I do with that, right? It feels like the ecosystem is really huge. So I'm not familiar with the ecosystem yet. So I just need to dive into it, is what I'm trying to say. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, should be very doable.
Oh,
Uh, why
it doesn't matter if it doesn't work, but
maybe it's ran out of disk space or something like this. It's a bit like the error messages that you get from the Docker daemon are a bit weird. It's super. Yeah, it just says like, okay, closed pipe, right, which means that it lost connection to the daemon. Then sometimes you need to then read the Docker daemon logs.
so I don't have. I'm using Podman. I don't know if that's been tested. I know they're closely compatible, but may not. They may not be byte for byte compatible, especially doing something like this. So, again, it could just be my setup, but we'll give that a moment. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Let's
so
clear the screen
it's
and
a
forget about it.
it's a 10 gigabyte file. So like one of the Yeah, one of the things that we need to do still is like dive a bit into the closure size for the containers right
Yeah.
now, because we have this mentality of pulling everything in for the developer environments. Then that doesn't work really well for production. As in that the image that you're copying can be quite big. Um, but you can disable things, right? So it's you can get there. Maybe in the future we'll introduce something like profiles where you will say like development for profile and you get like the full blown thing, and then production where you get like just the basics, or yeah, minimal or whatever should be called.
Awesome. All right. So it seems there's no more audience questions, which means you're going to be stuck with one of my harder questions, unfortunately.
That's perfect.
Right. So one of the things, again, this comes back to my mono repository use case, and I know that Devenv has some layers of composition. So I'm curious if there's a challenge that I have right now that could be solved using Devenv. Let's
Mhm.
assume we have a second Devenv project which has
Mhm.
protobuf files, and
Mhm.
it has a build step that compiles those and has an output directory. If I
Mhm.
want to consume that output directory from a different devenv, is that something I can do now or in the future?
So you would want to reference those protobuf like output, right? The
Yeah, let's build a really quick example with that Go directory we never used, right? So if I do devenv init,
Mhm.
and let's just open both of these at the same time. And I do apologize if this is a tough question, but I'm just,
No, no, it's a great question. I like that. Real use cases pop up.
yeah. All right. So this is obviously not a Go thing, but if we pop this open and just say that my build command creates a file. Now, it doesn't matter. It could be protobufs, it could be anything, but it creates this artifact called A
Hmm.
in the A directory. So now here I can say dev, in fact, I can just run my build step. Once I reload my environment, oh, out A, my bad.
Oh yeah, you need to create a
Yeah.
out or yeah.
So now this project has had some sort of artifact. Now this could be a
Hmm.
protobuf compilation. It could be a binary from a cargo build. It could be TypeScript code generated from GraphQL schemas, anything. But now, instead of my Rust project, I want to consume this out a file. Is that something that Devenv can help me with?
Yeah. So the short answer is no.
All
That
right.
right now you cannot really do that. The longer answer is that like one of the one of the kind of like vision for Dev is that like right now you can just kind of bring in the tools, like bringing the packages, the tooling, the processes and things like that. But like the longer term vision is that you will be able to upgrade to Nixify your whole project, right? So that you can say, okay, I have a Rust project, now build it the whole thing with Nix, right? Which means that like your project is built and converted into Nix derivations, so it's built like with sandboxing on and everything like that. um, and then once you would be able to do those things, then that the result of that build is actually your artifact, and then you would be able to kind of compose those things together. But that's of a like longer term, because I think right now we're focusing on just creating the environments, because I think that's where people should get started with Nix. And then Nixifying your project is usually not a trivial thing, at least at the moment with the tooling. But that is like a lot more work to get there and to help people with that. Um,
Okay. So the
but
only way to do that would be for the Go project to be its own next derivation and then consume it that way.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. So that's like a future work for
Yeah, I
Devenv.
think if Devenv could abstract that away so that I don't need to go deeper into next, that would be phenomenal. But
Yeah, that's the goal, that you would like say, I don't know, languages.go.nixify or whatever. I don't know how it will exactly look, and then it will do its best that you don't have to do much. But there are cases where you need to override things because Nix cannot like infer everything it needs, but by itself. So that's where it gets tricky.
awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today. Always finish with the same question. It's like, are you happy to share a bit about the roadmap, right? What is next for the Devenv project over the next 3, 6, or 9 months? What are you going to be tackling next to make people's lives a little bit easier?
Yeah. So right now we're just going through like issues people report and trying to not stabilize it because I think it's pretty stable, but like to squeeze out all the bugs, all the edge cases, because it's such a general tool of setting up all the languages processes. There's quite a lot that people do with it,
Yeah.
which is really exciting. Um, but we're trying to kind of go through that. And then the second thing we're looking into is like kind of reimagining how CI would work with the Devenv, and because like what I like about Devenv is like a local first tool, and then I think that's a better default than a lot of the CIs today is where like you first use this like arbitrary proprietary stuff, and then locally you cannot really replicate that. Um, so we're looking into and like experimenting with that because I think it would be pretty neat to have a clean developer environment built from scratch, and then that is your CI, where everything runs. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it. Like Devenv integrates already with caching, so like you get already a lot of those features out of the box. So that's already done. Yeah, that's about it. We have another project that I don't want to mention it, mostly because I don't want others to copy us yet. Once we release it, others are feel free to copy. But I'm really excited about that one as well. Unfortunately, I know I'm super vague, but yeah, it's gonna
Right.
come out sooner than later.
Right. Well, people can always watch this space. And I'll finish with, the Devenv is an open source project. You can find it at github.com/Casix/Devenv. I'm assuming your new product that is going to be launching soon will also be available there. So people can check out the organization, keep an eye on things. And of course, we'll be sure to get tweets and things out once it does launch. Any last words, Domin?
I don't know. I just want to thank you for this. It was really great. It's always great to see that how you would use it, and we found a few nice little things that we can improve on the way, and that's really valuable. So yeah, thank you so much for this. It was great for me. I hope that people enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, again, thank you. It's always makes my day when I get to sit down and show off a product that I generally love using, and I hope that other people are watching this and go check it out too. So, thank you again for your time. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you all again next time. Have a great weekend, and yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thank you.